Bernard Duhaime joins me now from New York. Mr. Duhaime, what leads you to believe that an independent inquiry is needed into the Jamal Khashoggi case?
Well, it's an independent and impartial investigation is required because this is what is required under international human rights law. Our working group on enforced disappearances is governed by the 1992 Declaration for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances, which is a General Assembly resolution, which provides for specific standards on investigations in allegations of enforced disappearances and provides with specific guidelines as to how these investigations need to be undertaken. More specifically, Article 13 of this declaration provides for these details. We're actually working on a thematic study which will be ready next year and presented to the Human Rights Council as an annex to our annual report, which will deal with specific standards and policies regarding investigations of enforced or involuntary disappearances. And we will go in more depth as to the modalities of the implementation of international law obligations that states have for investigating these situations.
You believe that the number has climbed, the number of these enforced kinds of disappearances has climbed in the last recent times.
Well, I mean, there have been up and down in the statistics. Our working group has been founded in 1980. Since then, we have received a total of 57,000 cases, more or less. There are still 46,000 cases which are pending. In the past reporting period alone, we transmitted 802 cases, among which 264 were under our urgent procedure, which means that these cases were transmitted within a delay of less than 3 months since the alleged disappearance occurred. Of course, there are times where the number of disappearances increase. What is worrisome is that this still exists. This is a absolutely unacceptable state of the situation. This is a crime under international law. It is prohibited under customary international law. It is unacceptable that this crime continues nowadays. Now, what we're looking at is changes in the form of enforced disappearances. We're looking at, while in the earlier years of our working group, we were dealing with a great quantity of disappearances that were related to repression for political dissidents, while nowadays we're also looking at disappearances which occur, for example, in the context of the fight against terrorism or against organized crimes, in the context of the migration situation, and so forth. Now we've been also witnessing waves of short-term disappearances during which individuals are often tortured, and that's extremely worrisome. As we indicated this morning to the General Assembly, we also note a trend of extraterritorial disappearances, whereby agents of a state capture an individual outside of its territory, sometimes with or without the collaboration of the state.
Which brings us to the Jamal Khashoggi case. What do you think of what you have heard so far from the Saudis, from the Turks, about how this investigation is taking place? You're aware they're doing their own investigation. What concerns you about that?
Well, of course, we already indicated on the 9th of October, so 7 days after the alleged disappearance, in a press release, that an investigation had to be undertaken immediately. a thorough investigation, an independent, impartial, and international investigation. We're more than 2 weeks later, and the investigation is starting, but it's very late at this stage. And as you know, in situations of enforced disappearances, every minute counts if we want to save lives. Now, as you may be aware, the victims who represent the organizations that represent the victim, the representatives of the victim, and the relatives of the victim, have made public recently the fact that they have triggered our urgent procedure here at the working group. So in this course of the procedure, we have asked both governments for information on this matter. We wrote to the Saudi authorities indicating that we had received this information and that we required an explanation and a detailed description of the investigation to understand what they are doing to establish the fate or whereabouts of Jamal Khashoggi.
Have you heard back?
Now, this procedure is a confidential procedure, the urgent procedure, with our methods of work at the working group. I'm able to indicate that this procedure has been triggered with us because the representatives of the victims have made this information public. To my understanding, they have not made information public as to a communication provided by the authorities. So at this stage, that aspect of our process is still confidential.
Okay. What if the guilties, or if the Saudis, or indeed any country, is found guilty of this crime? What should happen?
Well, states have an international obligation to firstly investigate thoroughly in accordance with international standards, in accordance with due process and all the applicable standards. They also need to stand trial. The persons concerned need to stand trial, and sanctions need to be applied, not only in terms of criminal sanction, but also in terms of allowing for the victims, including the relatives of a disappeared person, to exercise their right to reparation and to truth. So to firstly, of course, to be reunited with their loved one, to obtain compensation, to obtain information as to the specific instance of the disappearance, and also to adopt measures to ensure that this will not happen again. So the scope of reparations and the obligation of states to ensure reparations is not limited to the criminal prosecution and to a judicial decision.
All right. Bernard Duhaime, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you.